Hey guys, it's great to be back with one more episode of Swift Talk. Let's Go DC's new episode, which will be dealing more with creating iOS application using Swift. So let's continue with where we left last time, where we created a basic application using MVVM. Let's continue with creating a little bit more complex one this time, and we'll be creating an application which will have a table view which will be bound with a Model-View-ViewModel approach. So let's get started. So let's create a new Xcode project. Let it be a single view application. Let's call it TableView MVVM. And we are not using any of these, it's just a basic application which will just be using advanced features of MVVM architecture. So our project is ready right now. We just have the basic template with the view controllers and everything available right now. So first off, let's start by adding a table view. So this is our table view. Let's set some constraints. Have a top, and for the bottom, let's add a stack view because I want to include some controls there. And basically what I'm trying to do with this app is to create a to-do application where I'll be adding some items to the table view. So I have the table view, stack view added. Let's have a vertical spacing with the table view. Add some constraints. Our bottom one. We have everything in place, but let's also add a height to it. And that sets everything in place right now. So let me add a text field. And a button. So you can see that the stack view is accepting or auto-arranging things as and when we are adding items to it. So I might just make it a little more easier to use. Don't need this big button there, so let's have some more height to it. Let's have a little more height for the button, and let's call it add item. So you can see that everything is in place now. Let's also add the outlets to our view controller. Let's call it items to table view items. Text field, new item. And an outlet for the button, not an outlet really, an action. And let's call it add item. So this has basically created all the structures required. Also set the data source and the delegate for your table view. So this is pretty much our view controller side, and let's now start creating our view model, which will be used to bind this table view as well as to accept values from the text field and also an action from the add item button. So let's create that. Create a new file, and I'd call it ToDoItem. So this ToDoItem is basically representing the whole of this view along with the table view. So how do we structure it? So I don't need any foundation references. It can also be a struct, and so I'm just using it for struct, using it as a struct. And let's also define a protocol for each of the items which we will be adding. Let's call it ToDoItem presentable. So each and every item will be conforming to the ToDoItem presentable. And let's have some properties set for that. Let's call it value, text value or something, which will be of type string. Also let's add an ID to it, which will be it will again be a string, because view model is more for representation than for some actual logic. So we will mostly have it as string variables. So this has to be getter and setter. I'll just give it as getter. So you can see that I have a presenter ready. Let's create a struct or a class. Let's create a struct which will conform to this particular presentable. I'll just call it ToDoItem-ViewModel, and it will conform to ToDoItem presentable. Let's initialize with some value, and let the text value be nil. So basically that creates our item. So if you look at it, the table view cell will be represented by this ToDoItem-ViewModel. Also, one thing we need to have is a protocol to, maybe we'll have it later, right now, a protocol to actually define an action from the table view cell. But let's keep it simple right now. We will not have it during this tutorial, so let's just create the basic stuff required. Now let's create a variable called items. This is directly representing the data source required to be bound with the table view. Of type, let it conform to my defined protocol. So this is what is my item collection. Let's initialize it. Also, let's have a couple of properties to define our new text value. or let's call it new to do item value, new to do item, let be string, and one more thing we need is the action from the button click. So we need to create a protocol for that. Let's call it to do item view delegate. That's something like an action coming from your view towards the view controller. So let's define a function on to do item added. Let's keep it simple right now. So this ToDoView model will be conforming to that delegate. So we are basically ready with whatever is needed on the view controller, on the view model side. We have the items collection, we have the individual items required, and we have the new to do item string which needs to be used. Let's create some more delegates which will be required to add a new item, or also something for init where we will just load something when the table view is loading, or when the view controller is loading. So on the to-do view model, let's create some items and add it to the items collection. Let's call it item 1 is equal to do item view model. So let's define something like these are my to-dos. So maybe I'll call it washing clothes. Sorry. My second item, maybe buy groceries. I'll add one more. Wash car. So we have created 3 items. Let's add it to our items. So we have the 3 items added to the items collection which we have defined. So it's saying mutating methods append may not be used on immutable values self.items. So that needs to be where. So now we are pretty good with it. So let's try binding the table view with these basic values, and let's see whether it shows up in the table view. So for that, let me create one table view cell. We call it ToDoItem table view cell to create the XIB required. So that creates my table view cell. Next thing I need to do is have a configure function within my cell which will accept my presentable, which is an item presentable. So I'll call it ViewModel. So I'm just configuring with ViewModel. And it is my ToDoItem presentable. So I'm just passing the protocol. So basically this function is to configure your cell using ViewModel. So that's done now. So this cell can now accept a ViewModel to configure. So let's go back to our view controller, go to the view did load. I have the table view items and I need to register my cell. So it will accept nib name. So my nib name is ToDoItem table view cell. Let's keep that as nil, and for the cell use identifier, let's create a variable identifier. Let me call it as ToDoItem identifier, cell identifier. Just pass that, and this registers your nib with the table view. Okay, that makes it fine. So that's all done. Now we need to implement all the required functions, all the delegates and data source required for the table view. So let's start extending the view controller. So I would need number of rows in section. So in this case I just need one. Sorry. So number of rows in section will be coming from the view model. So let's create a reference to our view model. And instantiate our view model here. So as soon as it is instantiated, we have the items available in the items collection. So to access that, so let's add the number of rows we already know that there are rows available, so let's just force cast it, and let's get the cell for row at index path, and here we will create our cell. TQ usable identifier, and our identifier is identifier index path. So let's cast it to our type of stable view cell which we have created, which is ToDoItem table view cell, and then return that cell. So even before we return it, one thing that we need to do is, okay, so this is an optional, so we have to force unwrap it. So we know that the cell is a ToDoItem table view cell, so we have the configure function available where we'll be passing the view model. So now to access the ToDoItem presentable, we need to get it from the items collection, index path dot row will get you that specific item. Pass that to the view model, and this one is of type table view item presentable. So we have the items, so we can configure it. Now within the configure function, we need to set the values to the specific controls which we have added. So for that, let's go back to our cell and let's make some modifications here. So I need to have a label added. Maybe I'll add a couple of labels here. One or maybe one where I can, let's go with two. So one shows the count and the other one shows the item to be done. We have two of them. Let's set constraints. So we have all set. Maybe we'll give a width to this, and add the outlets required. Let's call it text index, and the other one as text ToDoItem. So we have a couple of labels available now. Let's start configuring those with the view model values. let's call text index.text is equal to the view model value, model dot, already have the ID, and the text to do item dot text is equal to the view model dot text value. So we also need to make sure that we need to unwrap those because these are optionals. So we can just unwrap it. So our configuration is also done. So let's go back and see what we have done. So on cell for row at index, we identify the cell based on the index, get the items from the view model, and then pass it to configure our cell. So let's run the application and see what happens. Bingo! So we have the 3 items listed here. So our data binding is working. Pretty exciting stuff, isn't it? I'm just warming up. I'm coming back with more in our future tutorials. So wait for it. Thanks a lot for joining me. Bye for now.